Texas, a state known by many for its extremely freeway-heavy expansion philosophy. While a lot of the country has moved on from the idea of new, large divided highways in their states, Texas has continued work on several projects around the state that would upgrade and construct new highways. Just recently on the channel, I talked about a new freeway in the state built in the 2000s. While researching for this video, I found a plan to build a network of superhighways from Mexico to the Oklahoman border. These superhighways would be up to 1,200 feet wide, or the length of 4 football fields, and they got a lot closer to actually happening than you'd think. Before this video starts though, make sure you do subscribe. Growth has been very good on the channel lately, and I would love if we could keep that up, so please consider quickly clicking the subscribe button. It's super easy for you and extremely helpful for me. Thank you. So let's start by talking about what really gave this idea its start and where it came from. So through the 1980s and 90s, Texas was experiencing a pretty major problem for a growing state, which was a steady increase in traffic, specifically freight traffic. Now, if we really think about it, obviously this makes sense. Located directly on the border with Mexico, a country of 127 million that shares a massive manufacturing industry with the US, of course there's going to be plenty of traffic coming into the country from the many major crossings on the border in places like the Rio Grande Valley and Laredo. So this made for extra stress on the current highways in Texas. Places like San Antonio and Austin had to deal with a significant amount of freight traffic on their already struggling freeways, increasing the overall traffic at a more extreme rate. So obviously something needed to be done about this. There were a lot of options for ways to offset this and ways that could divert the traffic. And the state of Texas spent a lot of time looking into what this might be. At the turn of the century, talk continued and became more serious on what they would decide. And in 2001, the plan for a map of super corridors was officially proposed in the state. So now that we're this far, we can talk about what these mega highways were and why this plan was so unbelievable. But to do this, it required a lot of research on my part, with super corridors being a very niche topic. This took me to some more risky websites, which is why I'm happy I have the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. With a VPN, you can alter your location and change it to various locations around the world. This makes your daily life less risky and protects your data from malware, phishing, and other scams. With my link, nordvpn.com/beavergeography, you can get a 2-year plan and 4 months free with a huge discount, and it's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guaranteed. Have you ever been trying to watch some Netflix, but your favorite show isn't available in your region? Well, with NordVPN, you can switch your location to a different country with just one click and watch that show. As well as that, you can use threat protection to shield you from malware, trackers, and ads, and use the dark web monitor to notify you if someone leaks your credentials. NordVPN is just an overall nice thing to have in your daily life, and it's a very good product. So go to nordvpn.com/beavergeography to get a 2-year plan plus 4 months free with a huge discount. It's risk-free, and if this isn't what you were hoping for, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. One more time, nordvpn.com/beavergeography. Thank you so much to NordVPN. Please consider getting this product. And let's get back to the video. A super corridor would consist of 4 different parts. First, there would be up to 6 lanes of passenger traffic. This would be where your normal travelers would be. Next, there would be 4 lanes for freight traffic, where only large semis and industrial vehicles can travel. Now, the mission here is obviously to disconnect these 2 types of traffic. Because if you've ever driven on a freeway, you know semi-trucks are one of the main things you have to worry about, and they make driving a lot harder. If you disconnect them, it makes driving safer and will greatly reduce traffic. This is why the middle passenger lanes would only go up to 3 lanes in each direction, because even though that would normally be a stretch in Texan cities, it works without all the freight traffic mixing in. It really would feel more like a road with 5 lanes in each direction. Next, there would be up to 6 rail lines for high-speed passenger rail, which is where things get more ambitious. Now, obviously, a lot of you were grinding your teeth at this idea before, but the plan was to market this project to as many people as possible. So there would be very high-end passenger rail as well as all the vehicular traffic, to try and improve public transportation as well. All of this was just meant to make traveling a lot easier. Next is the 4th and final part of this project, which would take up the most space. The 200-foot wide dedicated utility zone for water, oil, and gas pipelines, and transmission lines for electricity, broadband, and other telecommunications services. This would appeal to the more industrial side of Texas, with their major oil and gas industries getting an upgrade. This part would basically have all the other things they need, some overground and some underground. Now, as I said earlier in the video, the proposal was for the entire super corridor to stretch up to 1,200 feet wide in some places. This doesn't seem to make sense because 1,000 feet would have to come from 4 roads and 6 lanes. This doesn't make much sense because 1,000 feet would have to come from 4 roads and 6 rail lines. But when you factor in some space in between everything for trees and safety, just to make sure you don't have any cars running into power lines or trains, it widens a lot. I'm sure you can imagine how wide 1,200 feet is. But just to put it into perspective, it's 4 football fields wide, or 3 baseball fields long if you hit a bomb to center field at Fenway Park in Boston. And no, I'm not talking about the weird inlet that's 420 feet deep. The thought process here was to put infrastructure well ahead of its time, and as the governor at the time, Rick Perry, said, meet the needs of tomorrow, not struggle to keep up with the needs of yesterday. The mission was to invest Texas's resources into building infrastructure well ahead of its time, and reducing need for upgrades in the future. They knew Texas was going to grow at an extremely fast rate, and so if there wasn't a major project like this, they would be put pretty far behind. Now you might be thinking about how unrealistic this project was, and especially in the 2000s, there was no way this was actually a serious thought. But this was very real. Environmental studies slowly started, with the entire route in Texas being studied by 2004. The plan was obviously to take it around the cities and urban areas, only destroying rural land. So there were a lot of questions centered around how it would get through these areas, and especially which way it would go around Dallas-Fort Worth. So now we can take yet another step back and get a lot more extreme and talk about the NAFTA Superhighway. Now the Trans-Texas Corridor was a plan made by Texas for Texas, but it also connected with the idea for a large map of these super corridor highways to be built throughout the central part of the country into Canada and the West. This was a plan never put forward by government officials and even mentioned, but apparently people think this was always what they wanted out of it, being a major project to connect the 3 major North American countries together for freight traffic and other more efficient connections. It doesn't seem like this entire plan got off the ground, but there would be one main route up the center of the country in red, and some minor routes in yellow, as well as some purely rail routes in green. But because this was never a realistic plan, let's go back to Texas and tell you why these highways don't exist today. So I'm sure you can guess just by watching the video why there were so many criticisms, but there were a few major ones. First of all, people thought it wasn't the right move to create new high-end roadways when the current infrastructure was not being maintained already. Second of all, and probably more effective, there would be significant environmental damage that would occur by creating a super corridor. Sure, it's rural land, but the idea of a 1,200-foot mega highway going through any amount of land would be catastrophic for the areas. Thirdly, there were issues brought up about national and state sovereignty, because it would create a direct and quick connection straight from Mexico into America, making the rapid transfer of individuals, goods, and materials across the border very easy. And finally, the most notable problem was the cost of it all. At the time, there were 2 mega projects in Texas history: the Katy Freeway at $2.7 billion, and the Central Texas Turnpike, which cost over $2.5 billion. Now, I bet you can guess the Trans-Texas Corridor would be significantly more than this. Around $183.5 billion, that is. How does one singular state even come close to enough funds for this? Texas had rising debt already, and that much money would be absurd for an infrastructure project, even if it was the federal government doing it. All the land they would need to acquire and the amount of resources it would take to complete the project was unreasonable. And so, in 2011, with studies confirming all these worries, the project was killed before any of it had been constructed. The Texas DOT concluded it was more efficient to route the roadways, utilities, and rail separately. So that's the end of that project. But I do need to say one more time that this was real and got a lot closer to happening than I would ever guess. There were real studies, and the plan was completely serious, with a full detailed article from the Federal Highway Administration talking about where the entire project was at. So you can go check that out if you want. Thanks for watching.